behind the scenes, which was members of Congress demanded from the agencies to know how big they were and how many people had clearances, and to look at whether there's redundancy, whether too many of the same groups are doing the same thing. So there was a beginning of that. The SEAL Team 6 is a part of a very secret military organization called JSOC, who's very involved in all counterterrorism measures. And JSOC, when I first started writing about it, they are less accountable to Congress than even the CIA. And it's complicated to explain why, but now when we wrote about it, that changed. Congress said, really? And they changed the rules of reporting, so this organization is now. So I have to say, before I get another question, that one of the things that I would encourage all of you to do is to start looking on the military websites. Like, let's just take one example, the Air Force. The Brazilian Air Force has many good websites that talk about the equipment that it uses, the places it goes to do exercises. When I was doing this story about Colombia, I learned that the airplane that the Colombian Air Force flies is the Super Tucano, which is made by Brazil. So of course I was very interested in the Super Tucano. If you go on the website of Embraer, the defense system, you'll see who you sell the Super Tucano to now. It's a very good airplane. It can do things that not very many, like our Air Force doesn't build simple planes anymore. They build very sophisticated planes that are not useful in this sort of counterinsurgency. We have even bought Super Tucanos now to use in Afghanistan. There are countries around the world, some of which have terrible human rights records, that you are now selling Super Tucanos for in order to do counterinsurgency, which in my book, my language, that means that they're sometimes, killing their own people. So there are countries in Africa that are using them and others. So if you're becoming a regional power, which you are already, this to me is a good story. Are you going to sell every kind of equipment to every country that wants to buy it? Or will you have some human rights factors that you might want to include in the sales? So I would go, and that's one great place to start.
There are a couple of other questions about Top Secret America, saying how did you develop the sources to get all this huge information, huge amount of information, and what legal judicial precautions you had? I mean, were those stories heavily lawyered before? Because it's
this is funny. So because the database became so big, and you can look at the database now still online. It's WashingtonPost.com/Top Secret America. And you'll see we have lists of agencies and lists of companies. And we did the same thing that we did with the black sites. We called the agencies, all of them, and we said, we have this database. If you would like to come and see it, come and see it. Because we wanted them, if we found something that really should not be published, we would like to know, and we would consider not publishing it. Because there are some organizations that do some things that I think should remain secret. And you could imagine some of them, I hope. Yeah. So they came in. Many of them came in, and they were shocked that because we put this all together with open sources. They were shocked at our methodology, the job announcements, and the code names that are in the job announcements. And then once you have the code names, you can put those in and you find other things. And 99% of this is from the open web. So they didn't know that there was so much out there.
And there is no secret. You're not violating any.
Well, we can't violate the secrets because we are not
under the clearance or whatever.
Yeah, but they did put out press releases that said We want to remind all of our contractors not to speak to reporters. And they also said that this would damage national security, that what we did would make us much less safe. Well, one of the things we did, I have to say, because Google Maps is so good at this, we would find a building and we would use Google Maps to show the building. And at first we thought, oh, this is so cool. We'll let all these people, we'll let the public use Google Maps to look at this all. But then we thought, that's maybe not such a great idea, because a lot of people we don't want to necessarily know everything could also use that. So we didn't zoom down as far as we could. We zoomed to the state and city level, but not to the neighborhood level, which we could have done.
Yeah, there's one interesting question here. Say you said that USA journalists are not in danger. So House of Cards is a lie. Sincerely, the person says, but
House of Cards is a lie.
Okay, House of Cards is a lie. So
Yes.
House of Cards is
But it's
not
a
a
great.
documentary. Okay,
Yes.
all right. Now, having said that, I know that, and we have some people here from Brasilia. I know that living in it's not a question here, but it reminds me. In Brasilia, for instance, you report, but your kids go to the same school as your sources. We go to the same clubs. You meet in the same
That's
restaurants.
like Washington.
Yeah, exactly like Washington. Tell me a little bit about this, about how you become a friend with sources.
Okay, this is a very interesting question because in Washington, I say that too many reporters are too close to their sources. If I go to a cocktail party or a party, at someone's house, and there's officials there, I always have a list in my head. What do I want to know? And who is going to be there? And I work the whole night. The whole night. A lot of people, it's not what they do. And that's too bad because these are amazing opportunities. It also means that you have to be willing, as we say in English, to burn our bridges. You have to be willing to make the CIA very mad at you and still deal with the CIA the next day. And that, I can say, is not impossible if you're mainly nice, and you're even giving them bad information with a nice demeanor. It can be, helpful. And then there are some people who will never talk to you because they're just babies.
Yeah. But you make it clear that we are friends, but you are my source, or you're not friends. We're
I think they should know that. I don't make it clear, and if they blur, if they get confused.
That's good. So there is one question here saying you investigate that case for 2 years. How do you keep officials from knowing what you are doing? How much time did you give them when you call? I mean, before publication.
With a story that's very long like that, it's very difficult to keep it from them. I think because I think that some people might go tell them, but what are they going to do? Call up and say, "Don't do that story." As a matter of fact, I think that some of their reaction to the story helped the story. It helped me understand. For instance, when we first told them about the story, they said, "We would like you to come in and talk to the director of operations." Okay, I never got to talk to him. He was clandestine. I knew who he was, but we never ever. So I went in and talked to him, and one of the things he said was, the CIA can break laws in other countries. That's what we're there for. And that's true. But having him say it reminded me that we're going to do this story. And so, they themselves, I wouldn't say made their best case.
Well, talking about breaking the law in other countries, someone here is asking, what do you think about our president here being spied by the American government and all the foreign in
Yeah.
general. How does how do you see this and how it the repercussion in the United States of it?
Okay, I'm glad that is a question because I have, um, I think that when the NSA spying revelations came out about presidents, that it was really not a surprise to those people. Last night, I read some of the coverage of Brazil and NSA, and someone, a politician, and maybe it was the president, but I don't think so, was saying, oh, spying at the UN. There has been spying at the UN since the UN building was created, and everyone at the UN knows that. I wrote a story about it. Many people wrote a story about it during the Cold War. It is an open secret. I think it's also an open secret that we spy on you, you try to spy on us. It's just what happens. But because people are not told that and people don't understand it, your president is going to stand up and say, this is outrageous. My favorite case is the German case because I know in particular that Germany, France, Italy, and the United States were very close on sharing intelligence about terrorists operating in Europe and coming from North Africa. And they had a very tight relationship. So when Angela Merkel gets upset, it's for her public. So there is no case that I know about yet where relationships have not gone back to normal. So you see that the Obama and your president are now good friends again. And I am 100% sure that even when she was criticizing Obama, they understood what was really happening and that it would not break relations. Why? Because on one level, terrorism is a real thing and it cannot be destroyed just by one country. It moves around, people move around, they need to share intelligence, they need each other. And this is a problem of, everybody in the countries where this is an issue. So they tell a lie to the public based on politics, based on what they think they need to say. But in reality, these countries, their relationships do not change when on the surface there are these bubbles. It's absolutely, even the black sites, the secret prisons, when there was so much criticism from Europe at the CIA operations level, which means at the presidential level, because the presidents in each of those countries are the directors of their intelligence agencies, that there was no problem.
Yeah.
So
Someone is asking about the changes in the treatment of whistleblowers in the United States, and I would add that it has been a big change, not only in relation to whistleblowers themselves, but with the press, with reporters. And can you comment a little bit of what changed, what happened?
well, ever since 9/11, the press has been the enemy. There's just no doubt about it. But we are a soft enemy because we don't disappear and we're not
Right.
killed. They make it harder for us to get information. They open leak investigations, and you see there's one reporter, he's now okay, but Jim Risen from the New York Times, they were really mad at him for a book that he wrote. They were really mad at him for stories that he wrote, just like they were mad at me, but they only went after the book because it was not a New York Times book. So they really didn't want to go after the New York Times. They waited for something that was not a New York Times. This administration is bad or maybe worse than George Bush on their relationship with the media and national security. It's very conservative in that way. It's not friendly. They had more leak investigations, and I think in general people misread Obama, and maybe it's because of his background, and he's African American, and people thought it'd be really liberal. Well, no. I mean, he has made a lot of progressive steps in domestic policy, but in foreign policy, he's pursued the Bush administration's footprint, only much more. More use of drones, more use of the CIA, more use of the clandestine military units. He's, used that many more times than Bush started it. Obama has made it much larger.
Yeah. You mentioned that you don't tell the editors, and so you don't tell the editors until you reach to a critical mass or whatever. So someone is asking what are the other issues or things that you don't tell your editors? I mean, are there things that you, because sometimes if you have an anonymous source, do you tell your anonymous source to your editors, for example?
Well, I try not to. I think it's a good idea that you need your editors because you need them to be a sounding board and to help you make judgments and to ask you questions that you're not thinking of. So in general, you should, have a good relationship with your editors. However, I think that editors, a lot of times, who have not been reporters, they can talk too much in the newsroom. So if you tell them something that really is confidential, you have to explain how important it is to keep this confidential. And so, but generally, I think you need to be, and if you have a good editor, you need to use that editor's brain to make your work better. And it's just in this one area that you really, I think editors are very busy. They have a lot to do. You don't want them to tell you no. Because once they say, no, I don't want you working on that, you really can't work on it. So don't let them tell you no by waiting a little longer, and always make it sound like a less good story. So their expectations are lower. If you say, oh, I got this great story, and then they're looking for the big bombshell, but you don't actually, you have a little bombshell, they'll be disappointed. Instead, you could say, I think that this story might work out, it looks like it's good, and then you could give them a great story. So they'll be happy rather than disappointed. And I think that's just a sort of good strategy dealing with your editors.
Yeah. Someone were kind of puzzled by your question about the spying being just part of the war on terror. Because one of the things that struck here in Brazil a lot was the fact that Petrobras was being spied, and the Ministry of Energy and mining stuff. So she looks like she is asking the interest of economic power of the United States being, and sometimes corporations.
No, that's a very good question, and I realize my answer is a little bit too flip. It's a little bit. So on counterterrorism, that's one thing. Yeah. On economic interests, I think that's another. And it is in Brazil in particular, this has become, the key spying issue, and that's different than most of the other countries that have been studied with the NSA. And I think, I think the administration here probably is much sincerely angry at that, because that is not, it's not within the intelligence world even. It's not. There's no good reason for it.
Have you heard of any intelligence source or you heard any trustable source that believe that the United States have been behind the Arab Spring or protests in Latin America? I have never heard about this, but
well, not only was the United States not behind the Arab Spring, but the CIA, whose main job is to know what's happening in the world, especially in the Middle East, they were caught by surprise. Yeah. How did that happen? They were caught by surprise. And now the backlash against the Arab Spring is, in my mind, not not happening, and it's worse. These new authoritarian governments are now in power, and the United States has embraced them.
It's more difficult for the United States.
And now the United States is afraid of the next Arab Spring, or even little blossoms of, democracy or pluralism or even free speech. One of the casualties of the Arab Spring has been a rollback on freedom of the press that was happening in little ways in the Middle East. That was crushed also with the new regimes in power, and the United States is not even saying anything about that. So it's not a good. I think it's very unhealthy. And
there are a few generic questions here. One asking about the influence of Watergate in investigative journalism in the United States. I think our generation has been very touched with that. And I want you to connect with the other question that says that many news organizations are thinking that firing or laying off journalists is a way to keep them alive, and they want he or she want your opinion about that.
well, I sort of see the pendulum swinging a little bit. You see in the United States, for instance, some of the news sites that were just aggregators like BuzzFeed or Mashable. Now they are coming back to more traditional methods of reporting, and they're hiring actual reporters to do original work. So I think we had this swing away from traditional media, and now there's coming back a little bit, and so I think.
And the Watergate.
Well, Watergate was an inspiration to me when I was a little kid. I, loved I watched the hearings when I was in junior high school. I would come home, watch the hearings. I don't know what the courts are like here, but in the United States, courts are such a great window into information that you would never have access to. So when I was a little kid, when I was in high school, I would take the bus and go to the courtroom, especially criminal court. You could see the bad guy right there on the stand, and and they'd talk about what he did, and it was fascinating for somebody just to have access to that kind of information, and just so curiosity.
Yeah, in Brazil, the FOIA-like law, the access to public information law, is very new, and someone is asking here how it's working in the United States, and if journalists use
a lot of journalists use it on the local level in particular, and some on the national level, but not in the military, or definitely not the intelligence world. And I think I've filed one FOIA since in the last 20 years, and it was a FOIA that took
just one.
Yeah, because they're never going to give me what I want.
What you want.
So I filed a FOIA when I was first working on special operations in 1998. That's when I first discovered the special operations community. And I filed a FOIA about a certain unit. And 3 years later, I got a FOIA back, and I got 3 pages, and 2 of the pages were my own articles about the special operations. So don't rely on that. And I think in the United States, too many people rely on documents. People, sources, that's where you really can get with documents, but sometimes the best things you're not going to get documents on. I have so few documents, people are always surprised.
Well, someone is a couple of people are asking questions about what maybe they were in our breakfast this morning, and I made a joke with your tablet saying this is NSA is saying this because they are asking if you take any security measure and safety measure for your cell phones, or you just assume that you are spied and they know everything you do.
Well, I think I just assume. I'm not really sure that I believe that they look at my information, but I'm never going to convince people of that. So I assume that I just don't put much on emails. I want to meet people face to face, or telephone maybe. but I have all sorts of places in Washington that I know I can go with somebody where there are no cameras, where you can talk safely, your car, all sorts of things. So I found as a teacher too that young reporters, they are not so comfortable. They would rather email people questions. And I forbid this because the whole fun of being a reporter is to meet other people, meet people that aren't like you and a world that is not like you. It's so much fun. Why would you want to not do that? So getting to know people, getting to know, it can be really fun to get to know the local police. You'd be amazed at, I think it's probably the same here, but the police cultures all over the world share some similarities. And one of the ways to penetrate them, to get into them, is to respect them and their culture. So when I covered the military, I always wore my own uniform. It was navy blue, navy blue, navy blue. It was, I learned their language, I learned their acronyms, their slang. And as soon as you do that, and people, it's like, you know, how you talk to your friends is different than how you talk to your parents. The language is different. If you can speak their language, the faster that you can speak their language, this goes for any group of people, the quicker they might trust you because they might think, well, they know something about it that other reporters don't know. And being empathetic towards the culture you're trying to cover is the best way to get inside that culture. And that's the best way to really learn what's going on in the culture.
Yeah. There is one question here about why does American press did the American press take so much time to discover the harsh conditions of the interrogation, etc. And I want to widen this a little bit to talk about how do you see the role of the American press in general in the post 9/11 and the build up of the war, etc. Because there are lots of self-flagellation there. There are lots of criticism here and around the world, but in the United States, the press have a lot of.
Let me make it into two parts. One is the build up to Iraq, so we'll put that aside. The second one is the question about why did it take so long. I think the question might have a critical point to it, but the fact is the American press are the ones that discovered all those things. So it took a long time because it took a long time. It really was in the very beginning, the New York Times, Washington Post, and maybe and Jane Mayer from the New Yorker. There were just a handful of us who found out bit by bit what became known now as the interrogations, the renditions, the prisons. It just took a long time to do because it was so hard to do. But on the question of Iraq, so this was also the question of whether Iraq had weapons of mass destruction was not an easy question to get an answer for because it was secret. It's the same thing. It wasn't like there were people who had a different answer and we weren't asking them. A lot of those people, there was a lot of doubt back there. What we really failed at, though, I think, is highlighting the problem of invading a country and everything that could go wrong. And all the experts in Washington who knew anything about Iraq were saying this will be a mess once you enter. And there were some stories on it, but probably not enough. And so.
Yeah, I remember in the Washington Post self-flagellation, there was a part saying, we talk about that, but it wasn't page 22 or whatever. But it was not. It was an editorial thing that I reported. What someone was asking in the beginning, and I left it to the end. What's your next big project of investigative journalism? Are you planning something big and new? Should we wait for?
Well, I think I have been working on something, and it's going to start to be published hopefully by the end of July. I probably shouldn't say what it is yet because then it wouldn't be, good investigation. But I'm doing it with some of my best students in the university are actually co-reporting with me. So that is another way that I'm trying to teach the young journalists, how to be better source builders and better journalists.
There are just a few more, and we are out of time. But let's go a little from. Someone asked that by hiding the countries of the secret prism, and just in 9 years later, because of the European investigation, you were kind of don't you? The question is, don't you think that people of those countries deserve to know? But you said.
I think it's an excellent question, and that was the debate within the group of people that were debating it. If it's illegal in those countries and we don't say the names, then aren't we being complicit in the illegal act? And there were some of us who felt that yes, we were. I think the editor who made the decision was trying to balance other things, like potential safety questions. In his mind, because we argued a lot about this, and that was one of the unknowns that was just a little too potentially negative consequences that he just decided to be safer. I think some of it is knowing that when we put this information out, it wouldn't just end there. And that's what happened. It was the countries of Europe who forced the real and the journalists of Europe who forced this question. And it took 8 years to force an answer because those countries denied. I mean, still today, all three of the countries deny it, even though there's just concrete evidence all over that they did it.
There is one question about the drones and the say this person believes that thousands of innocents have been killed by drones, and surprised that the United States defend human rights and do that. And the question is journalism guilty of not reporting about that?
Well, I think it's that question of how many civilians have been killed by drones has been a question that many journalists have tried to look at. One of the obvious problems is that some of the drones are in areas that we can't go, in the tribal areas in Pakistan, for instance. So it's been impossible, I would say, to be on the ground in those places to gather that kind of evidence. And there are some human rights groups that have done a really good job in certain places. So we've reported on their findings, but in general, there hasn't yet. I think reporters are very interested in that. I think we absolutely write about the ramifications of drones. But just because we write about something doesn't mean the government's going to stop doing it. And I also have to say, to me, drones are one of the great
from both previous, right?
I don't see it as completely the military in charge of non-military things, diplomacy, relations, and all this. And that was written before, mostly before 9/11. Now the situation is 100 times worse. Military is bigger, the State Department is weaker, and ISIS is a reaction to well, to bad military, but also diplomatic decisions made in Iraq, really, that threw out the Ba'athist. Most of the military leaders of ISIS are the former Baathists who were disenfranchised when we came to Iraq. And that was about the stupidest decision that was made to demilitarize and to kick out all those former soldiers and the military leadership in Iraq, who were very skilled, very smart, and just to not try to integrate them into a new government, and then, of course, to allow a government that was very discriminatory and didn't want anything to do with them. So
Yeah.
what did they do? They
Big mistake.
formed their own
Yeah.
new terrorist organization.
In this context, someone in the beginning asked, but I was postponing here. What do you think about the fact that the Congress invited Netanyahu to speak there, despite of the White House? In this context, it was very strange, wasn't it?
Yes. Well, our Congress right now is so divided and so polarized that something like this can happen, and they don't care. I mean, that's a reflection on domestic politics and how dysfunctional it has become in the United States.
The movie Zero Dark 30, how truthful it is.
Well, I think the interrogation part of it was a lot of propaganda, and that's too bad. I mean, she had a lot, the director had a lot of help, and what happened is it looks like she bought a story that was not, that is a lot of propaganda. The main criticism of that film is that you can only get information from interrogation and from torture. And so you look at the Senate report, which it should be translated into lots of languages. It's an amazing report. The footnotes in that report are so rich in detail that it really lays open the CIA in a way that's never happened, which is one reason why the CIA criticized it so much. They don't want people to believe that report. And to me, it is like a roadmap to understanding how the CIA works.
So the two final questions, very quick.
Okay.
You did not go to a school of journalism. Someone is asking here, not exactly that, but would you, if you were a young person now, would you go to a school of journalism or not? And what do you think about, which was the question, what do you think about journalism education
You know,
these days?
I don't know if the school I'm at is very good. And that's why I'm going there. It's very
My school is very good too.
okay. And the schools that are very practical are good. You know, I realize that your generation has to learn technology that I never needed to learn. So thank God. So maybe that's, you know, maybe going to a journalism school for that is absolutely necessary these days. But it's still necessary just to develop critical thinking and also to go to a school that's going to force you to report, not going to talk to you about theory. If you have to take more than one theory class.
Okay. Okay, and the final question is, who's going to be the next president of the United States of America? Well, it's here. Any predictions? You live in Washington. You are there. You know.
I don't know. You're gonna make me not answer the last question because I don't.
That's why it's the last. Well, Hillary.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. President. Muito obrigado a todos. Queria aproveitar para dar os últimos agradecimentos aí embora, toda a equipe que trabalhou aqui no Congresso, não vou me animar para não esquecer ninguém, e espero vê-los novamente no ano que vem. É só isso. Obrigado, gente.